Hey friends, welcome to Good Take, Bad Take. This is the show where we go through our social media feeds. We find some examples of really great, awesome takes and some really not so great takes. We try to discuss what we think about them, why they're good or bad, and hopefully dig deeper into some of the discourse going on the internet. My name is Donald, and I'm here with my co-host, Britt. And as always, it really helps us out if you can like and share all that good stuff, especially because the rebrand, sure, if you want to get your friends in, remind them that we exist and are under a new, broader scope here. Hopefully, we're able to expand our audience in that way. So everything you do there helps us out a lot. Without being said, I think we'll move into some of our takes. So we'll start with this take from Zuby at Zuby Music on Twitter, who, and of course now, of course, we don't have the same necessarily restrictions we do on verified as far as it's opened up to the markets. So I guess we'll be having a lot more blue checkmark takes.
Yeah, potentially.
Now that it's $8, I guess, to let you in. Zuby tweets, "We still keep looking for political realm solutions to spiritual realm problems and being surprised when they fail." What is your thought on that one, since I threw that in there?
Oh, this is a fantastic take. Good take for sure. And as most takes by Zuby are. For those of you aren't familiar with Zuby, he is the current world record holder for the female deadlift. But he's actually a dude. He identified as a woman though when he did the deadlift, and he crushed it. So yeah, he holds the world record for that. But yeah, I think this is spot on. You and I are both of the Christian persuasion, the Christian faith. So this is an obvious to us, but even this, you can still see merit in this outside of it, even if you don't hold some sort of religious belief. In that we're looking for, political solutions, mass scale solutions to address individual choices, right, that occur. Society is made up of individuals. Alexander Solzhenitsyn talks about in a lot of his books, this concept of like, hey, like, yes, the terror of the Soviet Union came about, and yeah, you could blame any individual person, you could blame Stalin, you could blame anyone, but at the end of the day, we each individually made certain choices that eventually led to that terror occurring. Whether it was, we didn't speak up for our neighbor, or we chose to allow one little lie to come into our lives. And so at the end of the day, right, these big political solutions they're treating symptoms. They aren't actually treating the root of the issue, which is inside of each individual. People need to make good moral decisions. And I think it really illustrates as well as like what a dire strait we're in as a society, and that we can't even agree what a good or moral baseline is. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that he's completely on the money here. And to your point, I think it's very easy to talk about this from being an outright theist, an outright Christian and stuff. But I want to challenge, if anyone's listening and they're not explicitly religious. I find the only person who can disagree with this take is the strict materialist, there is nothing except what we can see in front of us. And even that person has to live in a world where there is some level of depth that they don't understand, because there are things that you cannot initially perceive that do exist. Like, think about germs, and doctors refused to wash their hands for so long because the benefit was not easily perceptible until you could prove it over and over. But the strict materialist who refuses to see any level of depth beyond what can be solved through politics, I think is the only person who has to reject this kind of claim. And I think
it's a terrifying thing if you do reject it.
It is a terrifying thing. I'll give an example of the kinds of places it leads, because I think even if you're not explicitly religious, I think most people intuitively, and from my perspective correctly, perceive that there is a spiritual element, whether or not they call it spiritual, to this world, to this life, that there's something deeper, that there's things of meaning, there are mores of ethics, there are I don't know, dimensions beyond a simple "I'm hungry, I'm gonna eat, and this makes my stomach feel good." Like, there's a level of depth there. And when you reject that kind of thing and you try to explain it away in a materialist way, I think where you end up is in the Sam Harris world, where everyone thinks, oh, Sam Harris is this really cool, smart atheist rock star. You can refute how we have ethics through, without needing like a religion, and how you can have morals without that. And ultimately, I think he kind of totally sold himself out, because I've had people who thought the arguments he makes as far as ethics, religion, morals, or excuse me, ethics and morals not needing religion, those kinds of things have been very persuasive. And then he went on that one interview where he was like, I don't think, or I wouldn't have cared if Hunter Biden had the corpses of children in his basement and covered them
Yeah.
up. That's more worth it than Donald Trump winning the election over Joe Biden. And that is like, okay, this is where you get with the strict materialist who has his own ethical system in place that is obviously screwed up to the vast majority of people who can perceive that there's something wrong there. And so anyway, so all of that long tangent to say, I think though that's the only kind of sliver of people who can disagree with this take. And when you think about it, you have to recognize there are spiritual dimensions. There are things that politics can't solve necessarily because of that. And so we have to look to find, and people can disagree to which problems are in what category, and that's where a lot of this should happen. But I do think that people need to recognize that there is a category of problem that cannot be solved through a political solution.
That's really interesting. You bring up the Sam Harris quote, because I mean Nietzsche predicted this, right? He was like, hey, like we had the Enlightenment, and so now people are figuring out that they can do away with their religious morals and underpinnings and all these different things. And he correctly predicted. He said God is dead. But a lot of atheists like to view that as like a triumph of like God is dead. But it's like, no, Nietzsche's like, oh, God is dead. And if he's dead, that means we're not going to have enough water to wash away the blood that's going to occur in the 20th century. And he was right, man. Like you look at, Soviet Russia, you look at Mao's China, you look at the killing fields in Cambodia, all of these things perpetrated by people that were, materialist, in that they had some moral that they created for themselves, the Übermensch, as Nietzsche called them. And they enacted that moral upon fellow human beings, and we all universally look at that and we condemn that. And what's terrifying, though, is to see someone like Sam Harris, who's supposed to be rational and like has the reasons why you should believe in certain types of moral underpinnings. And you realize that, if he doesn't believe in the moral underpinning in the same way that you do, he actually can be washed off his feet pretty fast, and be adrift in literally not calling for, but being okay with the corpses of dead children in order to serve his moral choices.
That's a really good point. It makes me think of I wasn't aware if you know the John and Hank Green, they're brothers. One's a writer and one's a
Not familiar,
more
no.
science guy. Yeah, they're YouTubers. They're some original YouTubers and they're fairly superfluous in online culture. And they're very lefty. I followed them when they were very early on in YouTube, and I've kind of just followed them out of interest. But they're very lefty and stuff. And I didn't realize this, but apparently one claims to be Christian, and the other is I don't know if you'd say atheist or agnostic. And someone asked them like, "Oh, does that create a tension between you guys?" And the one who's supposedly Christian says, "Well, I view it as we both." He used a different analogy, but to sum it up, we both are going in the same direction, and if our vehicles are different, it doesn't matter. We both know where we're supposed to be going. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that is not right. And what you're saying there with the Sam Harris thing is speaking exactly to that, where if you don't actually understand and have that foundation and understand, like for instance, that there's a spiritual component to why there are mass shootings, right? Like there's a spiritual sickness in people to do that kind of thing. If you're both going in the same direction, but you don't have that rooting and understanding of the problem, you can get knocked off your feet at any moment between that time. So even if you're going in the same direction now, well, one extenuating circumstance later, and the person who doesn't have that same understanding is going to veer totally off the rails and say, well, a shooting is totally justified if it's against people who would, I don't know, reduce gun safety laws. So shooting them is fine because it makes the masses safe, right? And you can get further and further apart, even if you're, for the time being, like Sam Harris. Oh, he sounds like he's rational. He has all the same morals about you shouldn't hurt people and yada yada yada. So he's right. You don't need these moral reasons for it. And then, as it turns out, you actually do, because again, when an extenuating circumstance comes up like this election between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, it gets you to belie what your actual reasons, and you get to I don't know expose yourself if you don't have those underpinnings.
Yeah, and last thing I'll say on this is, and I think this is the reason, one of the many reasons that I'm a Christian, but I think Christianity has one of the most coherent takes on like why you need to have like an overarching sovereign. And in Rome and stuff, like the Christians had this concept that like, hey, the ruler is the specific sovereign, but there's someone over that sovereign. The emperor actually serves an ethic higher than himself, which is the reason most of the emperors, like Nero, did not like Christians at all, was because Christians viewed like any ruler, yes, we will submit to the ruler so long as they submit to this authority that is greater than them. And I find that really compelling, and it makes a ton of sense. And it makes sense with how the world best works, I guess you could say. When our rulers go off the track, when you've got a Stalin that thinks that they can be God, you end up with being Stalin, right? History knows you as Stalin, as someone who kills millions of people. So,
Yeah, well, on campus universities, maybe that's more or less
yeah,
not a
yeah,
not
yeah.
a dirty word anymore.
True,
Okay,
very
we'll
true.
move on to our next take. This one comes from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and she tweets, "Daily reminder that Ticketmaster is a monopoly. Its merger with Live Nation should never have been approved, and they need to be reined in. Break them up." Before we disseminate, I just want to give context. This was right on the heels of Taylor Swift's concerts tour tickets going on sale. She's going on a big tour because I believe she is released a new
Yeah,
album.
something.
And obviously she's very, very popular, and the websites crashed, and Ticketmaster was down because so many people were swarming the site. And so AOC has the solution. Your thoughts, Britt, as a musician who has
As a
sold
musician,
tickets.
and as a musician that has toured, I've played thousands of shows all over the country. I've actually never used Ticketmaster once to sell tickets or been a part of an event. Maybe I have been a part of an event. I've done a few festivals, and maybe they use Ticketmaster for that. I wasn't exposed to it, but like we just played a show 2 weeks ago, and we used brown paper tickets for our stuff in Eventbrite. So I could name, before Ticketmaster, I can name probably a dozen or so companies that I've used or have seen other bands use. Ticketmaster for sure is one of the larger ones, and so because I've never used them before, I actually had to research into this a little bit. You and I have talked about our thoughts on Monopoly in past episodes for Cringe Posts and everything, and I'll let you get into more of like why overall monopolies are fine. But what's funny on the Ticketmaster side, so Ticketmaster and Live Nation merged in 2009. They were permitted to by the government, given some. They had to do some things, like they had to sell their ticket software. They're forced to sell their ticket software to another competitor to use for 5 years and some other stuff. But in digging on the internet, people have said, well, Ticketmaster is a monopoly, and the reason they've been able to keep a monopoly is because when big stadiums and big venues and big artists want to go find a ticket provider or a ticket manufacturer, Ticketmaster underbids the contract. So they actually take a loss on a lot of different stadiums. And so, they use this as proof that a monopoly is bad for the consumer. So it's like, okay, if Ticketmaster is taking a loss on a stadium and they're taking a loss on an artist when they sign a contract, that means that the customer is getting the best possible price that they can. Literally better than they probably should, because if Ticketmaster is taking a loss, that means that you are being charged for something that you shouldn't. You're being charged a price that does not break even. That means that you're being charged a price under what you should be to actually for the company to exist. That's part of Ticketmaster's strategy to keep their monopoly, but that's how most monopolies work that are actual monopolies, is it's actually keeping a price, keep providing a really high quality good at a really, really affordable price that no other competitor can actually enter the market. That means it's the best it possibly can be for the consumer.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say this is a bad take. We give it
Oh, bad
thumbs
take. Yes,
down.
bad
Yeah.
take.
I the first thing that struck me with this take was the problem. Okay, Taylor Swift is very popular and has lots of fans. Okay, uh, which leads into the other problem, which is the website Ticketmaster crashes because so many people are coming onto the site to try to buy tickets. Great. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So, what happens in this hypothetical world where we split up Ticketmaster and you have, let's say, Ticket A site, Ticket B site, Ticket C site, Ticket D site, and Ticket E site? Okay, you have 5 sites. And each of them, instead of one Ticketmaster getting 60,000 tickets, each of them gets like 12,000 tickets. Okay. So now you have 5 websites that are down because the same amount of people that want to buy tickets are now opening those sites on multiple windows. And so instead of having, this perfect division where it's, I don't know how many people, but let's say 30,000 people on each website evenly distributed, you actually have probably something more like 20,000 on each site, which is, again, these numbers are rough and I know many websites handle 20,000, but point is you have maybe not as many as you would on one site, but you do have more people because multiple people are going to be on multiple sites trying to get tickets there. And all of these sites aren't going to be able to handle the traffic. They're all going to crash and you don't actually solve the problem. This is the worst kind of solution that won't fix the problem because the demand is going to exist and people can be in more than one website at once. And so it's just such a stupid brain dead. Like, this is the class that people have chosen to rule over you and to create solutions to your problems without any room for failure, right? Like, if they fail, they don't get punished. There's no problem. You have to foot the bill. It's like if this was a company and that was your proposed solution to your problem, you would find out real quick that doesn't work and you've just wasted a bunch of money essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny too because there's overhead associated with having a single site and server spun up and the ability to have people manage and support these different ticket stuff. And so it's like, do you think that costs go down, up or down when you've got more people trying to offer the same thing? It's like, well, it's gonna be really hard because now you have 5 people with 5 times the overhead literally priced into these tickets, so it's gonna be rough instead of one overhead priced across all 60,000. And we don't know the actual numbers or whatever.
Right.
Not a Taylor Swift fan. I was happily at peace, sipping some coffee and hearing people at my work Teams chat, talking about it. But yeah. Anyways, Taylor Swift does some okay music, but that aside, the other aspect of it too that's kind of funny is in 2009 people were talking about Live Nation and Ticketmaster scalping, right? So like, hey, if Live Nation and Ticketmaster merge, that means that there's one place people can get tickets. That means scalpers will be able to use bots to get these tickets and then they'll sell them to other people. So if you bought Bruce Springsteen tickets for $100, bots would come in, scalp them for $100, and then they would try and sell them to other people for $1,000 or whatever it was. So Ticketmaster and Live Nation, obviously, right, to be wanted to be used by these stadiums and these artists and make sure that fans who are their end customer are happy, they actually rolled out new technology that fights scalpers. And I found this. I went to a UFC event last week or 2 weeks ago, and it was crazy. It was a Ticketmaster ticket, and when I pulled it up on my phone, the barcode on it actually changed every 3 seconds. So there is no way that someone could buy that ticket and then scalp it. Like, the person that bought it was the person that would have to use it, which I thought was really inventive. And it kept ticket prices pretty low for the event. And there was no scalpers on the street. I mean, there was one I saw, but like, he had like some physical tickets and I'm pretty sure they were fake because they were all digital for that event. So yeah, they innovation, monopoly, all this stuff, if it's truly a monopoly that is like antitrust that actually hurts the consumer, you wouldn't see innovation like that. You wouldn't see Ticketmaster bidding for contracts with artists and with venues at a loss. And you also wouldn't see that they only make 5% net income on their revenue each year. You would think with a monopoly that they would be doubling, tripling what their actual, what their actual revenue is in terms of net income. That's not true. They take a pretty modest. Their margins are the same as Walmart. Let's just say that. And which, when you think of Walmart, you think of somewhat okay goods at a really, really reasonable, at the most affordable price they can be.
Yeah, and the other thing about it, so you're bringing up the scalper angle, and kind of the inverse situation there is if you do have multiple companies like uh, AOC wants. I was thinking about it, and she would complain in that scenario too, because what would likely happen is if the problem that she's trying to solve is site being down, tickets or customers can't access tickets. Okay, again, not solved by spreading the tickets out. There's still the same number of fans trying to get the same limited number of tickets. So how would you actually solve that problem? Well, if you did have multiple sites that were doing this, one site probably would raise their prices because that would mean that fewer people are willing to pay, the higher cost associated with it. But it makes the supply lasts longer. So that same limited number of tickets gets distributed. And you know what that's called? That's called price gouging, something that AOC and her ilk hate as well. So the only way that her solution has any merit to it whatsoever is through another system of free market exchange that they hate. And so that's what I thought was thinking. It's so funny is like, again, like the only potential way her problem is solved is that maybe the websites don't crash and then it's first come first serve, which again, like how is that any better than the website being down? You're still, there's still people unable to access tickets. So the only way that you know make tickets more available for people who really want it is through price gouging, which she hates. So a very funny take where all roads lead to free markets being the only reasonable solution, and her little meddlesome policies doing literally nothing.
Making it worse.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. We've got our frequent guest on the show, Joe Walsh, with a take saying right after Trump has been reinstated on Twitter, his account has been restored. Joe Walsh tweets, "Good. Trump should be reinstated here. Don't silence speech. Debate it, refute it with other speech." Now, I don't know. Have we had a Walsh take that hasn't been totally awful before? I feel
I
like we
mean,
might have
he's
had
only ever
one.
been featured on cringe posts, so which
Yeah.
means it's automatically a bad take, right? To be on there. I say this is a good one.
Yes, I think we have our Joe Walsh good take, ladies and gentlemen.
I'll have to message him and let him know. I'm sure he really cares what I think.
I think so. I think so. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's I wouldn't say that this is the bravest take in the world. I think most people who are generally conservative, even if I don't know where the heck he wants to pin himself
I
these
mean, he's
days, but
woke and conservative.
yeah, exactly. You never know with this guy. But generally people who are conservative or on the right side of the spectrum, this is pretty basic libertarian, liberty people, classical liberals love this take. But that being said, there are a lot of hysterics. There's a lot of people who have taken this you know, absolute hard stance against hate speech, people who have Trump derangement syndrome, which I would say Joe Walsh has, who've gotten even this messed up. And so, you know what? We're gonna take every victory we can get, and it is a good take from Joe.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The good take. I was happy to see it because I was like, hey, like normally we're always giving Joe some things he should improve on. But this time it's like, hey, good job. I think other people should follow suit. It is a little bit late to the game, in terms of like where was this guy saying this back in the past. But I think this is a really powerful point, and I wish that there was. I would love to see a leftist that wants people like Trump or wants people like Elon Musk or wants people like Kanye to be banned to provide a coherent and logical rebuttal of this. It's like, hey, like if they're so wrong, if what they're saying is so abhorrent and so terrible, it shouldn't it be easy for even the layman to like recognize that or to point that out or to disseminate, the response to it and to destroy it. And the fact that you don't do that, the fact that you kind of just let them be there to the layperson makes them seem like, oh yeah, well they're right. So the answer is not, if you don't like certain speech, it's just better speech, to take that cliche. Um, and the left's response to this would probably be something like, well, like certain types of speech, leads to violence or whatever. It's like, well, you know, yes, but also speech that is like permitted leads to violence all the time. We see we've seen all this different, the stuff with the Iraq war and Afghanistan, misinformation, opinions that were wrong, sometimes intentionally wrong, intentionally misleading, sometimes maybe not intentionally misleading, still led to millions of people dying, in the Middle East. So at the end of the day, the only way to combat that would have been to let other people who disagreed with it also speak. And so I think we're way worse off without any sort of speech. We're way worse off without free speech and the ability to debunk bad ideas. So Joe, good job.
Yeah, and it's the question always goes to which, well, I mean, there's always the debate of it's a private company, can do what it wants, all that. I just want to again clear that out of the way. I've never thought Twitter had to keep Trump unbanned or allow free speech. They've never had to. I've always argued for a culture of free speech, one where institutions and um, the general public sentiment is open to more speech than not. I always think that the more local something is, the more right you have to control what is
Yeah.
or isn't said. Obviously, if someone comes over to your house for dinner and starts cussing you out or cussing your family out, you absolutely can kick them out and say that speech is not permitted. And that expands out to whatever you're owned. But I think the broader the institution, the broader the network you're in control over, the better more kinds of speech is just in generally. And I mean like even to the point where that's kind of one of the values that people who praise diversity for its own sake like to laud. And I would argue that that's just in general more of a power of free speech than the color of your skin is diversity. Diversity is powerful when you have diverse experiences, diverse perspectives speaking in a beneficial way, and you're allowing that, and you can gain. And whether or not you take everyone's ideas, you don't have to, but even knowing that's great and good.
Mm,
So I like those aspects of diversity. I think it's actually more a benefit of freedom of speech because I think generally when people advocate for diversity, they're only advocating for specific kinds. You're only allowed to speak in one direction, and I
yeah.
actually believe in true diversity in the sense that you get all the kinds of speech. And then as far as limits go, I think it's also reasonable for Twitter to have some limits if they want on things like, but the bigger thing being it should be clearly and explicitly defined as to what is and isn't allowed. None of this hiding behind the guidelines and saying you're breaking the spirit of our rules and not clearly showing what is offensive. That was kind of the biggest problem I had with Trump being banned was this very nebulous reasoning. They couldn't point to an individual thing he did. It was talking about all this inciting of January 6th violence. And when you look, and you can look on his Twitter account now, you look
Yep.
at the days, he tweeted like, hey, let's be peaceful. Remember, we're the party of law and order. Um, Whatever that means. But he says all these things about don't be violent there. So it's like, if Twitter wants to ban him, fine. But it's always good to have more speech in general because the perspectives that you disagree with will sharpen you, perspectives you hadn't considered will enlighten you. And if you're going to ban speech, make it clear, make it obvious as to what is and isn't allowed, and be consistent with that kind of ruling. And I think Twitter is turning into that direction, which is fantastic.
Well, to add to that point, I think most companies do have a pretty straightforward set of rules of where or why you can be on premises on their property, or even Facebook and Twitter at some point did have really clear rules. And then it's come out since that the reason they had to be this nebulous 1 foot in 1 foot out was due to pressure from the government, not knowing that, oh shoot, like in Twitter, the Biden administration literally met with different Twitter employees telling them like, hey, what are you going to do about Alex Berenson? This guy spreading now accurate, but back then misinformation about COVID-19. And so, you had these government forces with the power to shut down any of these companies with a snap of their finger, make them, net losers in terms of income, and to shut down everything that they've built, threatening them, basically dragging them before a whole board, a Senate committee or whatever, to shake them down and put the fear of God in them. And you even had Mark Zuckerberg on Joe Rogan admitting, like, oh yeah, like we had influence outside of Facebook and our own interests from the government to shut down and shadow ban and do certain, limit certain types of speech. And so, all these weird little things that happen, it's because of this weird externality that is brought forth by the government trying to, push certain agendas. Whereas like businesses have one line of motivation, which is how do we have the most amount of products sold for the most amount of price to the most amount of people? And so with that, it's like free speech naturally goes hand in hand with that motivation.
Absolutely right. Okay, we're moving
Oh boy.
to to this tweet, and the reason why there's this, if anyone's watching this, which is another pitch to our YouTube channel, Good Take Bad Take, on YouTube. If you're watching this or you're seeing it, there's a red X dash in there. This is actually this is a screenshot someone else took of this, and I'm gonna explain what that's doing there. But that's not our edition, but I will explain it. So Michael Tracy tweets, Herschel Walker doesn't come across as the ideal US senator, but the main reason he's called, quote, stupid seems to be because he speaks in a heavy regional dialect with lots of colloquialisms. This alone does not make him, quote, stupid. He sounds like countless blacks in the deep
Oh,
south. Um
oh boy.
so yeah, Britt, thoughts on
Ah,
this
it's a
take?
terrible take. Like,
Okay, yeah.
I I'm assuming that we have a screenshot because he deleted it.
So I just took the screenshot because I actually thought the X was really funny because the guy who I follow, I think it's Neon Taster or something. He said I should have this account, and he made it where it's like tweets that should have stopped here. So he has this X between the
Oh,
most of the tweet and the last line where it's so
oh.
basically he's saying the tweet should have stopped at this alone does not make him stupid. Should have stopped the tweet there, should have cut it off. And then it just goes one line too far and says he sounds like countless blacks in
I
the deep
mean,
south.
the left likes to cry. I don't really know Michael Tracy or what. I'm assuming he's a little bit more on the right in some
Uh,
ways.
I don't remember. I think Michael Tracy actually might be a lefty. I don't remember
Okay.
though.
I don't really know much about him, but regardless, this is a little bit racist, man. Like I mean, not just a little bit, a lot. I I I don't know where to even begin with it. Herschel
Well,
Walker is indeed stupid. I mean, that's
yeah.
without.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could just said. I guess you could have blanked out most of this. It just said he's stupid. Like he, as most senators are. You could also add that little bit in there.
Yeah.
This is a bad take.
Yeah. No, it's I was gonna say, I mean, he's a journalist, so that's kind of why I assume he's on the
Okay.
left. But um it's it's frustrating because I feel like journalists often cry about how irresponsible it is how Trump uses his Twitter account, or how people use social media and they spread ideas that are dangerous, or they misrepresent the news, or whatever it is. They always complain about how dangerous it is when people have their own platforms. And then they come out and say things that are it's like this is obviously a bad take, but there is going to be a segment of the population that just is rabidly anti, Republican. And there's also a segment of the population that is rabidly anti-democrat too. But they're so rabidly anti-Republican that they will see a take that says, Herschel Walker is stupid, or speaks in a dialect, heavy regional dialect, and it doesn't make him sound stupid alone. He sounds like countless blacks in the deep south. They won't get the full context. They won't understand why this is bad. They'll just latch onto it and then they just go with it. And it's one of those things where it's like, do you think this helps or hurts race relations? The idea, and the thing is, I'm almost positive he continues this tweet. But the problem is tweets aren't always linked together. You got to be careful about what you're saying. You can do all the kinds of back explaining, but I just think it's like you probably need to phrase your things better. You need to have takes. And the other thing I would say is like, say something that's worth saying. It
Yeah.
feels like this is a lot of rambling around something that doesn't matter, and the heart of the substance should be, um, the main reason he's called stupid is because of this, heavy regional dialect with lots of colloquialisms, but that's not it at all. And then cut in, here are his stupid ideas or whatever. Or here's what he said that's made him stupid, or here's why we should,
I
be
mean,
focusing on more important issues, I guess.
I guess if I was to like rephrase it in such a way, I'm not saying this is what I'd say, but like, because Herschel Walker does have a bit of a really rambling style. So it's like,
Yeah.
you could have just said that. Like,
Yep.
Herschel Walker has kind of like slow to get to the point, and uses a lot of, colloquialisms or whatever. That kind of makes him sound stupid, but he's not. There's other things that he actually says that are stupid. It's like, I don't know why they had to say that, about blacks or whatever in the South. Like, that's just, there's plenty of other people that do that too, man. Like it's, I like to refer to them as the, you ever watch Zootopia?
Yeah.
You got the sloth, right? Like
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
like sometimes it's really endearing and awesome. Like there's some people that are really awesome like that. And then there's other people like Herschel Walker where it's not very endearing. It's like you're kind of a jerk who just wants power. But yeah, there's so many reasons and good reasons to criticize Herschel Walker. Saying it like this is just like, it just distracts from all those good points.
Yeah, and to be clear, as far as I'm aware, he did not follow this up with anything. So there
Oh,
was
it's
no
still up, huh?
extra. Yeah, it's still up, and there was no.
Wow.
Yeah, there was no clarification as to anything about it. But it's like I don't know. to me, this screams like that this person's somewhat disconnected from things that matter. He's disconnected from critiques that matter, and he's disconnected from how actually insulting this comes across to an entire segment of the population. So I don't know. I thought this was a bad take, and
Agreed.
I just was a little bit startled that it
I can't
existed
believe.
in this form.
Yeah.
Okay, and moving on for our last take. This comes from Geraldo Rivera, longtime TV individual. I believe he's on Fox News now. He's kind of lefty for Fox, but has kind of some righty takes. Anyway, so he tweets. Well, I wouldn't say righty. I would say neocon. But anyway, Republicans get control of the House, and the first thing they do is no, not explore how to tame inflation or crime, etc. They launch an investigation of President and Hunter Biden. Boring, divisive, retro, unwanted, zero positive impact on the lives of Americans. Is this the real red wave? Brett, what's your thought on this take?
Um, it's kind of a hard one for me.
I
On one
wanted it to
hand,
be a hard one here. I did.
yeah,
Yeah.
on one hand, it's a bad take because, and that serves the troll side of me, which is I don't think politicians can actually solve inflation. I don't think they can actually solve crime. So they might as well make it entertaining for us, which would be investigating Hunter Biden. On the other hand, it is a good take, and that's like, hey, Republicans talk a good game. They say they're going to fix these things. They say they're going to do this stuff, and at the end of the day, they just want to like throw red meat to their base. And in that way, I guess I lean toward it being a good take. I think it portrays the spirit of the Republican Party very well. And they're awful. So yeah, good take, good job.
Yep, I was on a good take for this one as well. And it's funny because I was not expecting a good take from Geraldo Rivera. I do not find that I usually agree with him on anything. On the things that I would expect he would be good on, I find he's not, and the things he's bad on, he's bad
I mean,
on.
this is
So like,
disingenuous, right? I see a lot of people making this take that voted for the Democrats, but
yeah, exactly, right, and I don't know about him specifically, but no matter how you cut it, I agree. The ways that this is a bad take is to think that Republicans could fix it. However, if you're in that world, if you're not red pilled, if you're blue pilled, and I'm not using that derogatorily, or not blue is
you still
not
believe in the
Democrat.
system.
Yeah, exactly. If you still believe that the system functions, then this is about the best take you can kind of have with the current Republicans. Um, of course, you'd also have to recognize the Democrats will also not do these things. But yeah, it's like Hunter and Biden, Hunter and President Biden are noteworthy things because they are in positions of power. There's a lot with Hunter Biden and Ukrainian influence and the potential there for corruption. It's definitely something that's important. However, if there is a hierarchy of needs right now, if your main problem or your main purpose, I should say, to being elected is to serve constituents, things like inflation and crime are things that are directly impacting the lives of Americans. Unfortunately, right now there's a lot more that's impacting the lives of Americans with Ukraine and with things like that, but it is to a lesser extent, and that is more about the sort of the annals of power. And so I agree that if they really wanted to come in on a strong foot, they would say, hey, this is how we're going to solve these problems of inflation, of crime, of
It's what they ran
gas
on.
prices. Exactly, it's what they ran on, and it's what people voted for them for, basically, because they were sick of this. And Americans have a short memory. They don't care about the COVID thing, unfortunately. But I think that a lot of what pushed them over was things like the massive inflation they're feeling in their pockets. I think that's one of the reasons the red wave didn't do as well, is because people, for some reason, they like tyranny. But the thing that really did help Republicans was the fact that there was this high inflation, and you can always blame the sitting power for that. Well, whether they do it or not, the first step into fixing those problems is to declare that you're going to fix the problems. So it's like, even if you and I were skeptical, if there was a world in which the Republicans could fix things like property rights and crime and inflation, they'd have to start by making it their priority. So even though you and I see this at, if they declared all these things like, oh, great, they're going to, do all this sort of grandstanding in the halls and not actually fix anything, we're not even at that point. You know, we're
Nope.
not even where they're making that their declared issue. They're definitely doing it for a performative game. And it's I actually think that this is a good take, which is again surprising to me.
And they're never, what people forget is like Republicans get elected, or they get unelected for not doing what they said they were going to do in a lot of ways. Democrats get unelected for doing what they said they would
Yeah.
do. Um, but Republicans, they say they're going to do this or whatever. They're going to reduce inflation, but just realize, listener, that they will never ever tame inflation in the way that it should be tamed, addressing the actual root cause, which is doing away with the Federal Reserve, because so much of what they're, the reason these guys go in with a $174,000 a year salary and leave with tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in net worth, they have all of these outside interests they want to print money for. And they want it, and when they print more money, they can claim that they're doing something for you, but what they're doing is actually forcing you to take a really poor loan out. So if they did away with the Federal Reserve, then sure, but by function of their job, they do not want to do away with the Federal Reserve because it makes them less able to, produce results, as they would call it. So yeah, I like this take a lot. I wish it took it further, right? It could be an even better take by saying, yeah, and they never will, do these things. And so this just reveals how, the Hunter Biden thing is the same exact way that the left uses these different cultural issues to like kind of distract you and to like get the left on board and to think that they're like champions for justice or whatever. It's the same exact thing. It's just as cringy. It's just as corny. It's just as unreal. It has no substance whatever, so all to it. It doesn't actually help you out in the end. The best thing they could do for you is to leave you alone, but to leave you alone means they'd have to give up power, which is definitely not an option for them.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like every election, it's easy to be swept up in thinking like, oh man, this, this this is the most important election of your lifetimes. You're like, well, I know that's ridiculous, but like I really feel this inflation, and so maybe it is a good thing to vote for Republicans. And then maybe your local Republican loses the election. You're like, oh no, everything is hopeless. We're not actually good. And then you're like, wait a minute. Let me rewind this back to 2020 and remember that the Republicans passed the biggest spending bill in history and Donald Trump signed it. Like there was enough momentum with Republicans to create the very inflation you're suffering from. So
Yep.
don't buy it from them when they tell you that they're going to fix inflation, and definitely don't buy it when we're in the middle of inflation and their first priority is not to curb that by going to the Federal Reserve.
I don't have any more on it.
All right, I think we're good for this episode. So thank you guys for sticking with us, and make sure to again like, comment, share, all that good stuff if you're having a good time. We really appreciate it, and we'll catch you on the next one.